And the study I will present was part of my PhD that I defended last year under the supervision of the co-authors of that paper. And the paper is about momentum. And momentum is a phenomenon that has intrigued me for a long time. How do people enter a positive or a negative spiral? What happens during such periods? And in the media, we also read and hear often about momentum. The top header, for instance, is from yesterday, related to the presidential elections in the US. But researchers may also have momentum, and probably momentum processes are the most obvious in the domain of sports. The bottom sentence is from a live blog last week during the famous boat race between the students of Oxford and Cambridge. But what is this momentum and what happens during momentum? As psychologists, we often use the term psychological momentum, defined as a positive or negative psychological and behavioral dynamics that would emerge when we perceive progress in relation to a desired goal, such as the victory of an election, winning a sports match, or regress, and the progress would then be positive PM and the regress would be negative PM. And in line with this definition, we consider PM as a dynamical system, defined as a set of interconnected elements that undergoes change. And in recent studies, we were interested in how positive and negative PM emerges. How can we characterize the dynamics of PM? And to gain such insights, we looked at athletes' psychological changes, such as their momentum perceptions, team members, feelings of cohesion, behavioral changes, the efforts they exerted, coordination between team members, while they were gradually progressing in relation to the victory or regressing in relation to the victory. In one study with cyclists, for example, one group of cyclists started lagging behind, then gradually started winning seconds and leading, whereas another group of cyclists started leading and gradually started lagging behind. What we saw here was that a relatively long history of progress was needed before athletes' psychological experience converts to a positive PM, whereas a negative PM was entered relatively rapidly. So what we see here is a non-linear, history-dependent pattern of PM, which are two typical properties of dynamical systems. Now, what we saw in the headers earlier was that not only does momentum occur in different kinds of domains, including sports, it may also occur at different time scales. During one race, for example, one activity on one day, but also across multiple activities spanning weeks or months. And one typical property of dynamical systems is also that processes take place at different time scales which are connected. And that is what we wanted to test in this study. More specifically, whether single race events would shape athletes' long-term PM, which in turn would shape the PM dynamics happening during a race. In order to do that, we recruited regional and national level athletes from different sports, and we first invited them for a baseline session. We asked them to go all out on a rowing ergometer for 1 minute, and we captured their efforts with 4 sensors. Then we made a tournament schedule. We matched participants according to their levels on the ergometer performance, their posture. And before the tournament started, before the first race, we told them that they could win a money prize if they won 3 points by winning races. So the long-term goal was winning those 3 points. If they won a race, they would win a point. If they lost, they would lose a point. So winning races would let them progress in relation to the long-term goal. Losing races would let them regress. And they could win races by taking a lead of 9 seconds on the opponent. So the short-term goal was winning by taking this lead. This was the research setup. 2 participants sitting next to each other, competing each other with a curtain separating them. And before the race started, I showed a green and the orange paper to the participants, indicating the color of their boat on the screen. And they could follow the race on the screen in front of them, and we continuously captured the efforts they exerted with the 4 sensors that transfer the data to the computer. The race software that we used also allowed to enter psychological items. So each minute, an item would pop up, as you can see here, and they could answer these items verbally through voice recorders that we attached to their t-shirts, and they could not hear each other because they had soundproof headphones. And in this way, we could also collect time series of psychological measures. The races were manipulated. We already programmed them beforehand, and we assigned the participants to a positive momentum condition, who won the first 2 races, and to a negative momentum condition, who lost the first 2 races. Then, before the second race, so after 1 victory or defeat, and before the third race, so after 2 victories or defeats, we wanted to capture their long-term psychological momentum experience using a questionnaire, including 1 question of their long-term momentum perception, 1 question about their self-efficacy, which they could answer on a scale from -3, not at all, to +3, very much. And then, before the third race, participants in the positive momentum condition had collected 2 points. So they had progressed in relation to the long-term tournament goal. Participants in the negative momentum had -2 points, so they had regressed in relation to that goal. And before the third race started, I showed a green paper to both participants. So both participants thought that they were the green boat during this race. And this green boat first took a lead of 6 seconds, and then gradually, in steps of 3 seconds, started to move toward a defeat. And here we were interested in how the PM would change of the athletes during this period. And therefore, each minute, the participants responded verbally to the question about their momentum perception and the question about their self-efficacy, and we continuously measured the efforts they exerted, and for the analysis, we calculated those efforts relative to the efforts they exerted in the 1-minute baseline session. And I will first show you the results of long-term psychological momentum before the second race and before the third race. The long-term momentum perception and self-efficacy were higher for participants in the positive momentum condition, and these variables also increased for participants in the positive momentum condition and decreased for participants in a negative momentum condition. So what these graphs show is that the single performances influence the long-term PM development. Participants in a positive momentum condition developed long-term positive PM. Those in a negative momentum condition developed long-term negative PM. And then during the third race, we saw that the participants who developed long-term positive PM had significantly higher perceptions of momentum and self-efficacy, and these psychological variables also decreased less rapidly in the positive momentum condition. In addition, this group also exerted higher efforts during that third race. So what do all these results imply? Well, first, in line with the dynamical systems perspective, psychological momentum seems to be a dynamical phenomenon unfolding at different, multiple interconnected timescales. The single races, the single successful and unsuccessful races shape the athlete's long-term PM, which build up and in turn fed into the short-term PM dynamics unfolding during the race. Now recall also from earlier this presentation that negative PM, we found, was generally entered relatively rapidly. Here we found that participants who developed positive PM on a long-term timescale became relatively less sensitive to a negative momentum scenario during the next race. And I think more generally, these results also underscore the relevance of studying psychological and behavioral processes across time to understand how and when they change. Our psychological and behavioral responses during goal pursuit are not just determined by immediate positive or negative events or determinants, but are constrained by a larger performance process taking place during, but even extending across multiple activities in which we are engaged. Thank you very much.